Hello and welcome to Family Foundation Friday on the Authority of Love with our co-host David Walls. I'm your host Greg Williams, and we thank you for joining us. You may be watching on listening, I should say, on WJMM 99.1 FM, Central Kentucky's Life Radio. Thank you for doing that and sharing that information. Or you may have gotten a video or a podcast from one of our websites, and we thank you for that. We want to continue to share this message of God's Christ's kingdom gospel, a biblical worldview in every part of our lives and culture. So thank you for that, David. Welcome, brother.
Good to see you again. It's good to be with you, Greg.
Yeah.
Well, hard to believe it's August.
It is. It is flying by, man.
Yeah.
You know, you've heard this before. The children kind of speed thing up. The grandchildren is another exponential speeding up of the time warp or whatever it is, right? But we are thankful for it. How you kind of settled back in after your conference and vacation season? How's it been?
Yeah, no, it's been good. Trying to get caught up on some things and do some future planning for the fall. We got big elections. We got our forum. We got some exciting things that, Lord willing, we'll be sharing in the coming weeks as it relates to helping ensure Kentuckians and the Christian schools in Kentucky take full advantage of this tax credit scholarship program that we've talked to some about last week. So some exciting stuff coming up.
Yeah, there'll be more updates on that because we want people to be aware of that, but also to be praying for that because I think it is a huge position, David.
Well, and I think it might.
Responsibility.
I might bring it up again in something we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely. Yeah, we very well could. We need to. Speaking of which, we're going to launch with something we've talked about before, but there's more news on this. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
Sophie Cunningham.
Yes.
One of the key players for the Indiana Fever in the WNBA. I emphasize W for a reason. Made a great statement a couple of weeks ago about we shouldn't have biological men, which is literally what they are in the gender dysphoric realm, in women's sports. Well, her coach came out and had a comment, David, so share what that is, and we'll get into this controversy.
Yeah, this has been an interesting story as it has continued to develop. And so we kind of ended the program last week talking about, the strong comments that we're thankful for from Sophie Cunningham. But you mentioned, Greg, we're talking about the WNBA. But I think the question all has to be asked now, does the WNBA even know what the W stands for?
Well,
and shout out to the great folks over at Babylon Bee who's just been hammering on this point with some of their sometimes genius Christian satire.
Well, let's make sure they understand what Stephanie White said,
yes.
and then the Babylon Bee will clarify it for even more for her.
So there has continued to be a lot of conversation on this. And there's been several different WNBA coaches now, and even an owner that has kind of pulled themselves into this situation. But Stephanie White made comments and essentially said that she is not educated enough from a scientific standpoint to really understand this issue.
How did she get such a good job?
But she did say that essentially no matter what, she believes inclusion is the answer.
Yeah.
Inclusion is the answer. And then, further doubled down on this when she was asked more specifically about, effectively, should the WNBA invite biological males into the WNBA? And she said, well, I don't know. And when we start talking about biology, I'm not educated enough to speak about transgender and transitioning to give a smart answer.
Wow. Well, let me clarify something, and the Babylon Bee will help us with this. The W in WNBA is supposed to stand for women.
Yes.
The Babylon Bee helps clarify this because they need the clarification, I think.
Yeah. Well, and Greg, the interesting thing is I don't think for any in any way, shape, or form that Stephanie White or any of these other folks that have spoken into this issue really don't know what a woman is.
She graduated from Purdue University, one of our leading universities, public universities in our country, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I believe you had told me that she was the Miss Basketball
in Indiana,
which recognizes what? The best female basketball player.
Exactly right. Miss
and I'm sure she received that award at that time, thankfully, completely understanding what it was and why she was being recognized.
Maybe she didn't. She was still in high school then. That brings us to another point. We'll get to some other time. Yeah.
Right. We talked ahead of time. We're going to try to be gracious in this conversation.
Right. We prayed that.
But what I think we see from this, Greg, is, and this is kind of one of the bigger cultural impacts and things that Christians need to think about, is we're living in a culture that is still willing to say, we're going to trump ideology over what we actually know about truth, reality,
science,
and science,
yes,
and all of that,
biology,
and the media and everything that relates to that. We're also going to continue to value wanting to be liked and affirmed by the world,
regardless of whether it's right or not,
and regardless of whether it's true or not,
right.
Which those two things go together.
Yes, they do.
And so I think that's part of what makes this story and situation so interesting and worthy of further conversation, and obviously worthy of further contemplation for Christians about how we continue to be salt and light in the culture, to promote truth, but to also help us continue to understand that we have to reform education at a much deeper level than I think we even realize.
Absolutely. We've been saying that for a long time. As a matter of fact, I would have suggested, if this is where we knew it was going to end up, that Stephanie would have gone to IU, Indiana University, as a Miss Basketball, and then she would have been indoctrinated in the ideology of the Kinsey Institute, which has been a lot of the foundation, a lot of this stuff. I'm not saying that jokingly or anything. I'm literally saying that's where a lot of this comes from, and she was right there in the heart of it. And this is the struggle, David.
Yeah.
And Babylon B gives some clarity to maybe what the W stands for, I think, right?
Yeah.
You want to share
they have some suggestions. I'm just going to encourage folks to go look up the Babylon B's article on this one. But, and again, we're not just trying to, to pin this all on Coach White.
No,
there was other coaches, Cheryl Reeve, coach of the Minnesota Lynx that had a response to this that I would just frankly say was a bunch of moral evasion and gobbledygook. You saw even one of the Seattle Storm co-owners actually get in some kind of confrontation with some teenage fans that were simply showing their support for truth. For Sophie Cunningham, that were just wearing shirts depicting, XX and XY chromosomes.
There's your truth, your biology, your
absolutely.
Science, right?
And apparently she was the co-owner was thrown out of a game and may have some kind of consequences related to that. Again, just continued examples of how this pervasive ideology that we continue to be thankful for, that we've had so many policy victories against, and I do think we're seeing the cultural tide. But again, I think the way this story has been playing out over the last 2 weeks or so is just another evidence to how saturated our culture is in the lies and deception on the most basic truths of who we are as humans.
Let me make a few comments here, David, and then pitch it back to you for the whole idea of what you said earlier, the depth of which education reform needs to happen. Because here's a few questions I think that will help us show us where we are. First of all, is it reality that our public universities are not educating in this, or are they educating in such a way that the ideology trumps the truth and the science and the reason? That's what tends to be happening. And my second question, David, is because that tells us where our schools are headed and what they've been doing. The second question is, where are the churches? Where are church leaders and pastors? Where have they been in all this? They have failed either to completely address at all these issues that are very real, that are leading to sin and deception and brokenness in our culture, or they are watering down the truth so much that people are more enamored by and led by the ideology. That's how we get here. So we can even talk about the Socialist Party now, Democratic Socialist Party, because this is all part of that.
Well, it is, and and one of the other big stories that we've seen really of the last couple months, but this week in particular, is the continued rise of the Democratic Socialist really infiltrating and looking to be near at a tipping point, maybe starting to take over the Democrat Party. And their ideology is seeped through with this same ideology of subverting marriage, the family, human dignity. But honestly,
Constitution. Ripping at the culture. And they make strange bedfellows, David. They really do, because there's not a whole lot in common, or that they feel. But I think the whole idea of the ends justify the means. If we come together then that tells us what they're really after. They're not after really making the country better. They're after power and control.
Yep. Well, and we have seen this obviously throughout history, but they have been very clear that they want to essentially tear up the American system, the American constitutional order as we have known it, and we just
President
celebrated.
Obama said that. President Obama said that. We're going to transform America. That's what we're seeing. And if we don't stand up in our churches and in our schools and in our government, then it's going to continue. Yeah, it won't stop on its own.
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously, folks are aware of Mayor Mondami in New York.
Yes.
But now we're seeing, at least Democrat socialist supported candidates just won the big contested primary election for the Democrat nomination to be the next senator in Michigan. And look, this is actually close to home as well.
Right here. Yeah.
And so if folks are not aware, there's a Democrat socialist that has won the Democrat primary for a state legislative seat, a state House seat in Louisville. And the candidate's name is Robert Lavertus Bell. And I will just say, I became aware of this a number of months ago, and he is very openly and publicly touts his association with the Democrat socialists, has since I first saw his campaign website and so forth. Yes. And so, obviously, with this seat is one of the state House seats in Louisville, predominantly Democrat area. So he is, barring some kind of really unforeseen circumstances, he is going to be in the Kentucky House in the next General Assembly. Right. And so, again, we're seeing this all up and down the line. And so, I think as Christians and believers, we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean that we're seeing this dangerous, destructive ideology taking hold of, essentially one of the major parties? Yeah. And I would say was the most obvious choice and vehicle for that, because honestly,
look at their platforms.
Look at the platform, and you see you see the convergence. Yes. But this is
what's the impetus? What you're getting at, David, is what's the impetus? Where does this begin?
Right.
And I think we've talked about that. What's happening in our schools and what's not happening in our churches, if I could say it that simply.
No, I think you're absolutely right. We keep coming back to how we educate and disciple the next generation.
There you
go. We are reaping what we have sowed.
Yes, we are. Which is biblical.
It is biblical.
God's faithful.
It is biblical. But, and I'm going to tie it back to what I said at the beginning. It's one of the reasons why I continue to be thankful and encouraged about this federal tax credit program that's going into effect next year, that's essentially going to allow us here in Kentucky, taxpayers, to redirect a portion of their tax liability to support, I hope, Christian education. Because what's the antidote? The antidote to a education system that is failing our students and pushing them towards worldviews that are leading to destructive areas is going back to the foundations and saying, Christ has to be centered. Yeah. God has to be centered. And so my hope and prayer is that we see more and more students and families in Kentucky be able to choose Christian gospel-centered education.
We've got professionals all over the place out there that are either uneducated or they're fearful.
Yeah.
And neither one of those are good.
Yeah.
And we got to be educated in truth. So don't forget, save the date, October 24th. That's a Saturday at the Embassy Suites here in Lexington, Kentucky, is the 4th annual Kentucky Family Forum. And we're looking forward to that. John Stone Street is the keynote speaker. And we'll have more on that as we get closer, as always. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for your prayers. Thanks always to the Lord. Make it a great day, and God bless in Christ. I'm your host, Greg Williams, joined by our co-host, David Walls. You're listening to Family Foundation Friday on the Authority of Love.